Hi, everyone. Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with another week of track stats where we give you free handicapping and betting data to make you a better at the biggest tracks across the country. Now, before we get into that, I want to remind you to press the like button on this video and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. Subscribing is entirely free of cost and simply notifies you when new videos are dropping, which is really helpful because every week we have race previews, full card analyses, and coming up, we have so much content for the Breeders' Cup. We already have a couple of videos getting you ready for the Breeders' Cup Classic, as well as the Juvenile and the Distaff. So definitely want to go back and check those out. But we have even more coming up in the next couple of weeks. So definitely want to make sure to subscribe so you're ready for the biggest races come November at Del Mar. Now, let's dive into track stats. And for those of you who may not be familiar, track stats is something unique that we do on NYRA Bets, where we analyze how post-time favorites are performing at different tracks. Right now, we're looking at Belmont at the Big A, looking at Keeneland and Santa Anita. And then we also look at winning trip analysis by surface and distance. If you go to NYRA Bets or you have the NYRA Bets app, you can also dig into some numbers in a more granular way, looking at how favorites are performing by different class levels, by different distances and surfaces. But for this video, like I said, we're going to be focused on how post-time favorites are performing by levels of favoritism. And we're also going to look at winning trip analysis by surface and distance. All right, well, let's dive into those three big tracks that I talked about: Belmont at the Big A, Santa Anita, and Keeneland. We're 4 weeks into the Belmont at the Big A fall meet. We're 2 weeks into things at Santa Anita, and we obviously just had opening weekend at Keeneland. And before we get into the data, this is admittedly another piece of data, but maybe a more simplistic version of data. But I think it's a helpful one in that just looking at what the average field sizes are, because this really tells you a lot of stories when it tells you about, from a betting perspective, where your dollar might be able to go the farthest and where there's maybe a better chance of beating a favorite because the field sizes are larger and stronger. And so taking a look at average field size between these three tracks, Belmont at the Big A, overall about 8.5 horses entered on average across the dirt and the turf. You see a few more on the turf, which is typical across all of these tracks. Santa Anita, a little bit smaller in terms of field size. This is what we've come to expect, unfortunately, out in California in recent years. And then Keeneland, very large field sizes, particularly on the turf, averaging over 9.5 entries per race. So you can see kind of Keeneland having the largest entries per race, Belmont at the Big A second, Santa Anita third. Now, that doesn't necessarily lead to Keeneland being the best betting option. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at how post-time favorites are performing. If you're a chalk player, it was a good weekend for you at Santa Anita and Keeneland in particular. Because if you would have just played the chalk out there, if you would just flat bet post-time favorites, which is admittedly a challenge sometimes at those tracks because of late CAW money. But if you're able to just bet late post-time favorites at those tracks, at Santa Anita, for instance, you would be up for the meet. You would actually be up 2%. So really, 204 ROI. At Keeneland, you'd only be down 1%. You would have returned $1.98. However, at Belmont at the Big A, betting favorites, not very profitable. You would have only gotten a 155 ROI or negative 22.5%. So in terms of beating favorites, Belmont at the Big A is actually the track that's probably, from a betting standpoint, probably the most betting friendly, actually. And this plays out if you look at the number of favorites that are winning. The smallest numbers at Belmont at the Big A, only a third of favorites are winning. And again, this is through 4 weeks. So this is now about 141 races have been run. So you're getting a pretty significant end count. Santa Anita, this is what we've come to expect from Santa Anita. Over 40% of favorites are winning, 43%. It's a very chalky track. It's a very chalky meet. It's just something you have to be aware of when you're playing. Don't go chasing huge tickets, I would say, in a lot of instances. Find a race maybe where you think you can really spread, because you can get some big bombs and some big prices. As you can tell, almost 14% of the winners at Santa Anita have been 10-1 or over. So there's been some prices getting home, but you also just get these long stretches where favorites win almost every race. So something to keep in mind. At Keeneland, admittedly, this is through 1 week, very limited sample size. These numbers are probably going to fluctuate a little bit next week when we return to it. But You've seen close to 40% of favorites winning there too, 38.7. More importantly, the winners have really come from your pretty logical choices. Almost 75% of winners have been 4-1 or under. That number is even larger than Santa Anita, which is 70%, and Belmont at the Big A, only 61.7% of winners have been 4-1 or under. So if you want to catch a price out of these three tracks, play up here in New York, because I'll be honest, that's where you're going to be able to get a price a little bit more consistently. Those 10-1 and over winners, 15% at Belmont, 14% at Santa Anita, 13% at Keeneland. So pretty close to the same numbers, but it's interesting to see how, even though Keeneland has really big field sizes, we love that obviously as a player, hasn't necessarily yielded the sort of huge upsets, or it's been rather chalky results or very predictable results at the very least. Like I said, with that 4-1 or under number being 75%. Well, let's take a look at how favorites are performing by level of favoritism. And this kind of tells a little bit more of the story. So if you look at Belmont at the Big A, you're 1-9 to 4-5. Basically, anything below even money is winning at about a 56% clip. That's not bad. Although, honestly, it should be, like statistically, it should be closer to 60, 65%. Because, as I've said before, if you're an even money choice, that means you have a 50% chance of winning. So if you are below even money, that number only goes up pretty much exponentially. All right. So to the point of being a 1-9 shot, where basically you have a 90, 95% chance at winning. So when you look at all of that, and you look at all of these horses that are below even money, they should be performing a lot better than just 56%. That number is only 54% actually at Santa Anita, and only 33% at Keeneland. Admittedly, they only had 3, I believe, in that sample size. So rather limited there. Even money to 9-5. This is where you see a lot of favorites go off. So this is by far and away the most populated grouping. And at Belmont at the Big A, 36% of those even money to 9-5 horses are winning. Look at Santa Anita, though, 46.9%. This is where you really see favorites overperforming based upon their odds. That's almost what we would expect to see from just even money horses, let alone even money to 9-5. So these horses that are 7-5, 8-5, 9-5, really overperforming based upon what we would statistically think. Keeneland, around 40%. Then you look at the 2-1 to 3-1 choices. Now, this is interesting. Belmont at the Big A, not done very well there, 17%. You go to Santa Anita, 26%. That's actually about where they should be. And then you look at Keeneland. This is why the return on investment was so good on post-time favorites. And this is one of the benefits of a large field, is that when you get large field sizes, even favorites will go off at a good price. 2-1, 5-2, 3-1 in some cases. And at Keeneland, they have been winning at a 41% clip. That is not sustainable. That number is going to go down. But that explains why the ROI at Keeneland is so good, because you have these 2-1, 5-2, 3-1 favorites that are returning $6.80, $7.20, $8 on a win, as opposed to a below even money favorite that's returning $3.30, $2.60, right? You're getting a better ROI from those favorites that are winning because they're at a higher price. So even if favorites are winning at Keeneland, the field sizes at least ensure that those favorites are a better price than they would be in a shorter field someplace else. So there is kind of a silver lining to that analysis in terms of looking at how favorites are performing overall. Well, let's take a look at how the track is playing at these different tracks and looking at the winning trip analysis. And let's take a look at Belmont at the Big A, which has the largest sample size because, as I said, we've had 4 weeks worth of races here. Let's take a look at the dirt sprints versus the one-turn mile. Dirt sprints, we've had 46 of those. And what we've seen is that it is a speed favoring track, very much so. You are not getting horses coming from the back in these sprints. Now, that can be anywhere from 6 to 7 furlongs. And what you're seeing is that an equal number of horses are winning gate to wire or tracking from within 3 lengths of the pace at the 3/8 or half mile mark. only 8% of horses are closing from more than 3 lengths back at the 3/8 or half mile mark. So again, you're not really seeing horses closing. They can make up ground at times, but I can't tell you the number of times I've watched a race. A horse makes a move from the back in a dirt sprint, and I think maybe they're going to get there, and they just kind of flatten out. It just takes a lot out of them to make up that ground sometimes. Very speed favoring. Andy Serling, who does the track trends for NYRA, obviously also talked about kind of the inside bias that might exist sometimes. So not just looking at speed, but inside speed in particular. So again, there's nuance to these numbers. Always advise you to check out Andy's daily updates on track trends, which you can get on NYRA, which is all free as well. Now at a 1-turn mile, a little bit different. This past weekend was interesting because all of the 1-turn mile races that were run this past week at NYRA, the winners came from off the pace. Now, in a lot of instances, they came from a length or two off the pace at most. But obviously, we saw a horse like Chancellor McPatrick come from well off the pace to win the Champagne. We saw another horse in a maiden race come from a little bit further back, I think 4.5 lengths back to win going in a 1-turn mile. So you've seen that tracking trip be the most effective, almost 50% of winners tracking from within 3 lengths of the pace, 35% leading gate to wire. You have seen closers do a little bit better. 17% of closers in that 1-turn mile are coming from more than 3 lengths off the pace. So you can close in the mile. Part of it is, honestly, it's just, some horses, when they stretch out to a mile, are not capable of doing it. You have some horses that are up on the lead who are maybe 6.5, 7 furlong horses. They tire that last furlong and a half. And as a result, horses coming from off the pace are going to be a little bit more effective. So you've seen the 1-turn mile play maybe a little bit more fair to different running styles, certainly, than the dirt sprints. Now let's go to the turf and let's look at the inner versus the outer turf course. And the inner turf course is where you see most of the turf route races run. I should say all turf sprints are run on the outer turf course. And we do have that analysis up on NYRA Bets if you want to dig into that. What's interesting is looking at the distinction in turf routes between the inner and the outer. Early on in the meet, the outer was playing a little bit better to front end speed. As more races have been run on it, honestly, it's been playing pretty fair. You've seen some horses be able to go gate to wire. You've seen tracking trips be effective. You've seen closing trips be effective. Granted, only an N of 11, so not an overwhelming sample size. The inner turf course, a little bit more of a sample size, 28 races to this point. And this has been very consistent throughout the meet. It is a closing favoring track. You are not seeing a lot of gate to wire winners. You are seeing some tracking winners, and overwhelmingly, though, 50%. So 14 of the 28 winners going 2 turns on the inner turf have been closing from more than 3 lengths back at the half mile mark. So something to keep in mind when you're looking at the analysis and you're looking at the PPs for how does the turf course play and what sort of running style does my top choice have? And if I were to favor a leader, if I was to favor a sort of gate to wire type of horse on the turf right now, and I saw that race was carded for the inner turf course, I might be a little wary of supporting that horse, depending on whether or not there's any other pace pressure in the race. And we have a horse like Makanga running this weekend up here. That's a horse that loves to go out on the front end. She's running a mile and a 16th this time around. I hope that the horse is able to get it. I really root for that horse a lot, but interesting to see how the course has been playing. Now let's head out west and look at Santa Anita. And again, these are through 2 weeks and dirt sprints, dirt routes. Can you say speed, ladies and gentlemen? This is California personified. First of all, 43% of favorites are winning. That's about as California as it gets. And second, you're just not going to pass. And that's true at Santa Anita. It was true in the summer at Del Mar as well. Now, fall in Del Mar is a little bit different. And we'll have some data for that to look into how the fall at Del Mar plays for Breeders' Cup, because sometimes you can come from off the pace on that track. The weather changes a little bit. Track composition in terms of just the amount of moisture that's in the dirt changes sometimes. So some things to keep in mind. People who live out there always talk about how the climate changes a little bit in that fall meet or that, Breeders' Cup time to really change things around at Del Mar. But listen, at Santa Anita right now, you just need to have front end speed. If you're sprinting, you can track, you can come from a little off the pace, you can come from a length or two, but don't do any more than that. And you've only had one horse out of 12 that's been able to close from more than 3 lengths back, overwhelmingly gate to wire tracking horses. And in the 14 dirt route races, forget about it. You're just not closing at Santa Anita. All of the winners have been either on the lead or within 2.5 lengths of the lead at the half-mile mark. So you need to be on the lead or really close to the lead in order to make any sort of success here at Santa Anita on the main track. This was something that we saw as well at Del Mar in the summer. As I mentioned, I believe at Del Mar in the summer, there were 22 dirt route races. I believe only one. So I think it was like 4%. It was only 1 out of 22 came from more than 3 lengths off the pace in dirt routes there. I bring that up because Chancellor McPatrick just won the Champagne and is headed out to Del Mar for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. That horse likes to come from well off the pace. That's not the way the track has been playing out there at all. Now, on the turf is a little bit of a different story. And it's funny to see how the numbers in the turf sprints are the exact inverse, actually, of the dirt sprints. So in the turf sprints, you have about 8% of horses leading, 50% of horses tracking, and 42% of horses closing. So you've seen trackers and closers do quite well on the flats. Now, that's not the downhill, right? The downhill is its own thing, which we do have disaggregated and posted up on NYRA Bets. But on the flats turf sprints, this is what you're seeing. You really want to be coming from off the pace. Speed of the speed has not been good. In turf routes, this is also very typical of California. And I will say that I've tracked Santa Anita before. I've tracked Del Mar before. This is very typical in that the turf course out there in turf route races plays incredibly fair to all running styles. That is, I have to say that. As much as I will say the main track is clearly speed biased, the turf courses at Santa Anita and Del Mar have always played well to any type of running style. So that is something I think from a betting standpoint, we actually take some solace in that you can support any type of horse and not think that, well, I got to worry about how the track's playing or how the turf course is playing against them. So something to keep in mind there when you're playing Santa Anita. Now let's wrap up talking about Keeneland a little bit. And listen, it's only 1 week, limited sample size. Right now, you look at dirt sprints. A little bit of speed favoring, close to 50% gate to wire, 38% tracking, 15% closing. So listen, you've seen horses come from off the pace, but most of them are up on the lead and tracking close to the pace. That's just typical of dirt sprints, quite frankly, in the United States. So that's not that unusual. The dirt routes, listen, we've only had 5. 3 of the 5 were gate to wire winners, 1 tracked, 1 closed. So again, not going to draw too many conclusions from that sort of limited sample size, but just wanted to at least show you what we have up and available. Now, when you talk about the turf at Keeneland, same sort of thing. In terms of a limited sample size, those turf sprints, only 4. Trip analysis, pretty straightforward in terms of 2 going gate to wire in the turf sprints, 1 tracking, 1 closing. Turf routes, a couple more cases, 9 overall. There we've seen closers do quite well. We've seen that late turn of foot really come through on the turf course. Obviously, a notable exception of this is a horse like Carl Spackler, who won over the weekend, I believe, in gate to wire fashion. So, you can, again, win on the turf course going gate to wire. But again, the general propensity has been horses closing from off the pace. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this week's track stats. We got a lot more on NYRA Bets, so make sure to go over and check it all out. Make sure to like and subscribe this video to get all of our latest content here on NYRA Bets. Listen, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.